Get this pauper away from the table. Romy's words sliced through the clinking of silverware and the soft hum of conversation. Maggie Wilson froze mid-step, her hand still on the crystal water glass, feeling the room tilt slightly, though her face betrayed no emotion. She glanced around the dining room, noting the stunned silence of the guests, the stiff posture of her son Ethan, who looked too young to reconcile such harshness, the way the polished oak table gleamed under the chandelier lights, reflecting a scene she had once thought warm and inviting. She took a slow breath, steadying herself, noticing the precise placement of the napkins and the untouched plates, the scent of roasted chicken and garlic filling the air. Every eye in the room was now on her, a mix of disbelief and curiosity, and Maggie let herself study them all with calm detachment. Romy, standing at the head of the table, wore that practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes, a mask Maggie had come to know too well. The corners of her lips tightened imperceptibly, but she said nothing, only letting the pause linger, long enough for the weight of the insult to settle fully in the room. In that silence, she noticed small things that had always passed unnoticed. The subtle angle of Romy's stance, the deliberate placement of her silverware, the way her husband Ethan avoided direct eye contact, and the slight twitch in his fingers as he tried to appear unconcerned. Maggie's thoughts drifted momentarily to the years she had spent preparing meals for this family, decorating the house for birthdays, Thanksgiving dinners, and holiday gatherings, all with care, attention to detail, and love that had gone unrecognized. She remembered the holidays spent alone in the kitchen while Romy orchestrated her own little schemes in the background, each time testing boundaries, each time teaching the family to look past her contributions. The memories did not bring her anger. Not yet. Instead, they settled into a quiet, simmering clarity. She observed Romy's actions, cataloging them silently. The raised eyebrow at a comment, the way she had subtly nudged the seating arrangements to assert dominance, the faint smirk that accompanied her minor successes. Maggie realized that this display at dinner was only a continuation of patterns she had begun to see months ago, years even, but had previously brushed off in polite silence. She felt the familiar tightening in her chest that she had once thought was anxiety, now recognized as the instinct to assess, to watch, to plan. She let her eyes roam the room one last time before turning slowly to the sideboard to pour herself a glass of water, moving with deliberate calm, a slow grace that contrasted sharply with the chaos she had just endured. Each movement was a study in restraint, a subtle message to anyone watching that she was present, that she was aware, and that she would not be cowed by theatrics or public humiliation. The tension hung between them, thick and palpable, yet Maggie maintained her composed posture, her hands steady, her gaze unwavering. As the chandelier cast its warm light over the room, she considered the choices ahead, to confront immediately, to withdraw entirely, or to gather her thoughts and observe before acting. The initial shock of Romy's command had passed, leaving behind a measured, silent power. Maggie placed her glass down with a soft click that echoed through the otherwise quiet room, and for the first time that evening, a small, knowing tilt of her head betrayed the inner reckoning that had begun. She would not be moved, not by shouting, not by social cues, and certainly not by the calculated cruelty of her daughter-in-law. Instead, she would wait, she would plan, and she would allow the unfolding of events to reveal the true nature of everyone at the table, while she remained a calm, steady observer, her presence a quiet yet undeniable statement of strength. The guests resumed their small conversations, the clinking of cutlery attempting to reclaim normalcy, but Maggie's awareness extended like a net over the entire dining room, noting details, capturing reactions, and silently preparing for the subtle shifts she knew would come. In that moment, the house felt both familiar and alien, a place of memories and tension interwoven, and Maggie understood fully that tonight was the beginning of something far larger than a single insult. It was the unveiling of intentions, a test of patience, and a stage upon which she would quietly assert her dignity and authority, without a word, without a display, only the slow, deliberate power of observation and calm intelligence guiding her next steps. The dinner had quieted, leaving only the faint hum of the air conditioning and the occasional scrape of silver against china. Maggie Wilson remained standing near the sideboard, her hand still resting lightly on the crystal water glass, as if anchoring herself to something solid. She surveyed the room with careful attention, noting the subtleties that most would overlook. The way Romy adjusted her posture to seem taller, the slight narrowing of her son Ethan's eyes as he tried to avoid direct confrontation, the soft murmur of whispered conversations that halted the moment Maggie moved her gaze. Every detail became a point of reference, a small clue in the unfolding tableau. Maggie observed the polished oak floor, the flicker of candlelight reflecting against the silver candlesticks, the way the steam from the roasted vegetables curled upward, and she cataloged it all in her mind, as if creating a map of the emotional landscape around her. She remembered the countless dinners she had prepared, the meticulously planned meals for birthdays, anniversaries, and holiday gatherings, each crafted with care and attention, each an offering of her presence and love. She thought about the time spent ensuring the family felt welcome and cherished, the long hours arranging the dining table, setting the silverware just so, polishing the crystal until it gleamed. All of these small, deliberate acts had built a history of care that had gone largely unnoticed, taken for granted, or worse, dismissed. In the quiet of that dining room, Maggie felt the weight of that neglect, not as anger, not yet, but as a sober awareness that she had been underestimated. She moved slowly to the china cabinet, opening it with a deliberate grace, pulling out a small water pitcher and filling it with ice-cold water, the sound crisp against the still air. Each step was measured, deliberate, a silent assertion of her own presence and dignity. As she carried the pitcher back to the sideboard, she allowed her gaze to meet Romy's just briefly, letting a flicker of calm intelligence pass, without words. Romy's eyes shifted for a fraction of a second, betraying the unease Maggie knew she had planted. Maggie's mind wandered through the events of the past weeks, noticing patterns in the behaviors of both Romy and Ethan, subtle cues that had hinted at manipulation and control. She recalled the way Romy had gradually shifted seating arrangements at previous dinners, subtly influencing conversations, drawing attention away from Maggie, and asserting dominance in ways that had seemed trivial at the time, but now revealed a clear strategy. Maggie considered her son Ethan, recognizing the conflict within him, the tension between loyalty to his spouse and residual affection for his mother. She noticed how his hands fidgeted on the table, the careful avoidance of direct eye contact, and the faint twitch of his lips as he tried to smile, a smile that did not reach his eyes. Maggie's understanding deepened with each observation, reinforcing a quiet determination to navigate the dynamics of this room with precision. She set the water pitcher down with a soft, deliberate click, letting the sound carry subtly across the room, drawing attention to her controlled presence. The other guests shifted slightly, sensing the change in energy, the unspoken assertion of Maggie's authority and calm awareness. She took a measured breath, allowing herself a moment to assess, to strategize, to prepare for the next moments in the dinner. The simmering tension remained in the air, palpable yet restrained, a testament to Maggie's careful attention and patience. She allowed herself a small internal acknowledgement of the situation. She had been placed in a position designed to unsettle her, to test her composure and authority, and she had met it with quiet observation and unwavering attention. Maggie's eyes roamed once more, taking in the nuances of body language, the slight shifts in posture, the subtle expressions of discomfort or impatience, all pieces of a puzzle that she was assembling in real time. In this stillness, she recognized her advantage, knowledge, patience, and the calm assertion of dignity, a power that did not need to raise its voice or demand immediate action. The meal continued around her, the conversation picking up again in muted tones, but Maggie remained attuned to every detail, cataloging each reaction, each word, each gesture, her mind a careful ledger of the evening's unfolding events. She understood fully that the true measure of the night was not the immediate reactions, but the long game, the subtle shift of power and perception that she could influence with every deliberate act, every measured response, every calm breath and careful gaze. Maggie felt a quiet surge of clarity and control, knowing that her presence alone, patient and deliberate, was enough to reshape the dynamics at the table and set the stage for the eventual revelation of truth and the restoration of her dignity. The sound of silverware and Soft conversation resumed around the dining table, but Maggie Wilson remained poised, her posture deliberate and her gaze attentive. She observed every subtle movement, the way Romy shifted her weight from one foot to the other, the faint tightening of her lips as she smiled politely at a guest, and the careful avoidance of eye contact from her son Ethan. Each gesture spoke volumes, a silent dialogue that Maggie interpreted with precision. She noticed the careful arrangement of chairs, the positioning of place cards, and the slight lean of Romy toward the center of the room, a move meant to draw attention and assert control. Maggie allowed herself a small, quiet smile, an acknowledgement of her awareness, but she said nothing, letting the tension settle like a tangible layer across the polished table. She recalled the countless hours she had spent planning family events, from elaborate holiday dinners to birthday celebrations, ensuring every detail was perfect, every dish prepared with care, every guest made to feel welcome. Those efforts, once taken for granted, now illuminated the contrast between her enduring patience and the calculated behavior of Romy. Maggie reflected on the subtle signs she had previously dismissed, the minor rearrangements at past dinners, the careful steering of conversations, the orchestrated compliments meant to appear sincere but hollow at their core. She cataloged these in her mind, piecing together the patterns, understanding the methods behind the manipulation. As she poured herself a glass of water, she let her eyes wander across the room, taking in the expressions of the other family members, noting who seemed uncomfortable, who watched quietly, and who remained oblivious to the underlying tensions. Each observation added depth to her understanding, a mental ledger of interactions and intentions. The soft glow of the chandelier highlighted the careful details of the table setting, the gleam of the polished silver, the folded linen napkins, each element a testament to Maggie's meticulous care and long-standing presence in the household. She felt the quiet swell of determination, a calm readiness to respond strategically rather than react impulsively. Every subtle glance and movement around her became data, guiding her thoughts toward the steps she would take to assert her dignity and reclaim her space within the family. Maggie allowed herself to breathe slowly, each inhalation measured, each exhalation steady, a physical manifestation of her inner control. She recalled the stories she had told herself over the years about loyalty, patience, and perseverance, now reframed in the context of the evening, reinforcing her resolve. She moved her glass slightly, letting the light catch on the crystal, a deliberate motion, a silent declaration of presence and composure. The conversation at the table carried on, but Maggie's awareness remained acute, her mind weaving together past experiences with present observations, constructing a strategy rooted in patience and quiet authority. She noted the ebb and flow of dialogue, the subtleties in tone, the nuances in pacing, and the pauses that signaled intention or discomfort. Each element became part of a broader understanding of the family dynamics, a map she could navigate with care. As the dinner progressed, Maggie maintained her composed demeanor, a calm center in the midst of subtle manipulations and social performances. Her presence was understated but undeniable, a quiet force that influenced the room without a single word. She observed Romy, Ethan, and the other guests, cataloging reactions, noting inconsistencies, and understanding motives, all while remaining outwardly serene. The balance of attention, awareness, and restraint allowed Maggie to gather the insights necessary to make deliberate decisions, to respond thoughtfully rather than emotionally, and to maintain her authority in a space designed to challenge it. In the gentle rhythm of the dining room, Maggie held herself with dignity, her mind both analytic and reflective, poised to navigate the intricate interplay of familial relationships, with the understanding that patience and quiet observation were tools more powerful than any immediate confrontation. As the dinner continued, Maggie Wilson allowed herself a brief, reflective pause, her gaze lingering on the patterns of movement around the table. Each guest's posture, each subtle facial expression, each careful adjustment of silverware conveyed layers of intention that she cataloged silently. She remembered how the dining room had been her sanctuary, a place where she had once orchestrated celebrations with precision and care, ensuring that every element, from the polished oak chairs to the meticulously folded linen napkins, contributed to a sense of warmth and welcome. Now, those same elements seemed to reflect the tension and unspoken judgments that filled the room. Maggie observed her son Ethan, noting the slight furrow in his brow, the hesitant tilt of his head, and the way he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His responses were measured, cautious, as if he were navigating a tightrope between allegiance to his spouse and residual respect for his mother. Romy's presence was deliberate, her movements calibrated to dominate the space subtly, without overt confrontation. Maggie studied her for a long moment, noting the slight tension in her shoulders, the careful placement of her hands on the table, and the faint, deliberate pauses in her speech. Every small gesture was part of a larger pattern, a strategy to assert control and influence perceptions. Maggie's mind, trained by years of observation and patience, began to map these behaviors into a coherent understanding. She reflected on past dinners, the minor adjustments and orchestrations she had previously overlooked, now revealing themselves as consistent, intentional actions. She noticed the whispers exchanged among certain guests, their glances darting toward Romy before settling uneasily elsewhere, indicating both awareness and caution. The interplay of attention and avoidance told Maggie more about intentions than any spoken word could. She allowed her awareness to extend beyond the immediate interactions, considering the dynamics that had been cultivated over months and years, recognizing the subtle manipulations designed to marginalize her influence and diminish her presence. As the candlelight flickered across the polished surfaces of the dining room, she felt the quiet strength of accumulated experience, a measured patience that allowed her to observe and understand without immediate reaction. She reflected on her own contributions, the care she had invested in the family's traditions, the dinners she had prepared, the holidays she had planned, all of which had built a framework of trust and comfort that now contrasted sharply with the present tension. Maggie's awareness sharpened as she traced the connections between gestures, expressions, and the positioning of guests, discerning the unspoken hierarchy of influence in the room. She acknowledged internally that the evening's events were not random, that each action, each glance, each micro-expression was part of a larger narrative, and that her role, while understated, was central to understanding and eventually guiding the outcomes of these interactions. She moved with deliberate calm, adjusting her posture slightly, tilting her head to observe a reaction, letting the measured stillness communicate a quiet authority. The room seemed to hold its breath, caught between polite conversation and subtle contestation, while Maggie continued to catalog every nuance. She understood that patience and observation were powerful tools, that her composed presence, unwavering attention, and deliberate restraint allowed her to perceive truths that remained invisible to others, and that these truths would inform the careful, strategic steps she intended to take in the moments and days ahead. With each measured breath, she reinforced her own inner clarity and quiet power, preparing herself to navigate the complexities of family dynamics with insight, precision, and dignity, turning observation into understanding and understanding into deliberate action. As the evening progressed, Maggie Wilson allowed her attention to extend beyond the immediate interactions at the table, considering the broader context of the family dynamic and the subtle currents of influence at play. She observed the soft murmurs between guests, the fleeting glances exchanged between Romy and a few distant relatives, and the slight shifts in posture that indicated awareness of her presence. Maggie's mind traced patterns, noting how Romy had positioned herself in previous gatherings, how she had guided conversations to emphasize control and to elevate her own influence, while minimizing Maggie's contributions and presence. Each observation fed into a growing understanding, a map of intentions that Maggie compiled quietly and deliberately, without a single outward gesture betraying her awareness. She recalled the countless holidays, birthdays, and Sunday dinners she had meticulously prepared, the arrangements of flowers, the timing of courses, and the careful balance of flavors and presentation that had gone unnoticed or underappreciated. These memories did not stir bitterness so much as clarity. She understood now the gap between effort and recognition, intention and perception, and she allowed this understanding to strengthen her resolve. Maggie's eyes roamed to Ethan, noticing how his attempts at neutrality and polite conversation faltered under subtle pressure from Romy. The way he glanced at his mother for guidance even as he hesitated, uncertain how to navigate the competing demands of loyalty and propriety. The small cues, the tightening of hands on the table, the pauses in speech, the deliberate pacing of responses, became data points in Maggie's internal ledger, a record of behavior to be considered carefully before action. She sipped her water slowly, deliberately, the glass cool in her hand, letting the liquid ground her while her mind remained active and observant. The warmth of the chandelier light, the polished surfaces of the table, and the muted reflections of candles across crystal and silver all contributed to an environment that Maggie now perceived as both familiar and subtly charged, each element a frame for the social maneuvering occurring within it. She noted the strategic positioning of Romy's gestures, the careful emphasis and tone, the way she had guided earlier conversations to test boundaries and assert dominance without explicit confrontation. Maggie cataloged these actions silently, recognizing patterns that spanned beyond the dinner itself, indicators of a calculated approach to influence and control that had unfolded over months and years. She allowed a moment of internal reflection, recalling her own patience and careful attention to detail over decades of family management, the measured way she had navigated tensions and guided outcomes in the past, and the quiet power she held as a result of experience and perception. Each observation she made strengthened her sense of preparedness, the awareness that she could engage with the family dynamic strategically, using understanding and composure as tools more potent than immediate confrontation. As conversation continued around her, Maggie remained composed, a calm presence amid subtle maneuverings and underlying tensions. Her gaze, steady and discerning, caught the nuances in Romy's expressions, the hesitations in Ethan's responses, the fleeting expressions of others around the table, all contributing to a comprehensive understanding of the scene unfolding before her. The patience and quiet authority she maintained allowed her to absorb the complexities of interaction, to plan her response with precision, and to navigate the evening with a measured approach that emphasized observation, discernment, and deliberate thought. In the soft ambient light, with the aroma of carefully prepared dishes filling the air, Maggie held herself with dignity and focus, aware that her composed presence was a statement in itself, signaling attentiveness, awareness, and an unspoken readiness to act thoughtfully and strategically in the moments to come. As the dinner hour progressed, Maggie Wilson remained a composed observer, each movement and gesture around her cataloged in quiet detail. She noted the subtle cues of Romy, the deliberate placement of hands, the carefully modulated voice that suggested control, and the fleeting glances exchanged with Ethan, her son, whose hesitancy revealed an inner struggle between loyalty to his spouse and the residual respect he held for his mother. Maggie reflected on the past weeks, on the incremental shifts that had gradually altered the dynamics of the family, the small manipulations and adjustments she had once brushed aside but now recognized as deliberate patterns designed to assert influence. She thought about the years she had invested in maintaining traditions, the careful orchestration of meals and celebrations, the thoughtful consideration of each detail that had been largely taken for granted or overlooked. These memories did not bring resentment so much as clarity, a recognition of the quiet persistence required to understand and navigate the subtle currents of power and intention at work. Maggie observed the room with measured attention, taking note of the positions of each guest, the subtle inflections in their speech, the brief hesitations and shifts in posture that communicated more than words could convey. She allowed her awareness to encompass both immediate interactions and the broader context, understanding the patterns of behavior and influence that had developed over time. Each observation added depth to her comprehension of the family dynamics, informing a strategy of patient observation and careful response. She moved with deliberate calm, adjusting her posture and tilting her head as she assessed the reactions to Romy's statements, cataloging each subtle shift in energy and expression. The chandelier cast a warm glow over the polished surfaces, the reflections in crystal and silver adding layers to her perception, each detail a point of reference for understanding the social landscape. Maggie considered the interactions between Romy and Ethan, the careful pacing of their conversation, and the small, almost imperceptible signals of discomfort or awareness, all pieces of a larger puzzle that she could interpret with the clarity afforded by patience and experience. She noted the rhythm of the room, the ebb and flow of dialogue, the subtle adjustments of behavior in response to her presence, and the way the atmosphere shifted when she moved or made a minor gesture. Each of these observations contributed to a comprehensive understanding that allowed Maggie to maintain authority and composure without direct confrontation, to wield influence through insight and presence rather than overt action. She sipped her water slowly, allowing the cool liquid to steady her, while her mind continued to track the nuances of body language, expression, and tone, integrating these data points into a strategy informed by years of observation and careful consideration. Maggie recognized that the strength of her position lay not in confrontation but in awareness, in the capacity to read intentions, to anticipate reactions, and to respond with measured precision. In this way, she maintained a quiet power that influenced the room subtly, asserting dignity and presence, and preparing for the thoughtful, strategic actions that would guide the family toward clarity and recognition of her insight and authority. The evening continued, the conversations and interactions unfolding in layers of nuance and subtle manipulation, while Maggie remained a steady, discerning presence, attuned to the rhythms, the gestures, and the unspoken intentions that defined the true landscape of the family dynamic. The subtle tension in the dining room seemed to thrum with quiet energy, each exchange and glance a thread in a complex web of family dynamics that Maggie Wilson was unraveling with careful attention. She noticed how Romy leaned slightly forward as she spoke to a distant relative, her tone smooth but her words chosen to influence perception and assert subtle control, while Ethan's hands remained poised on the table, restless yet restrained, signaling the internal struggle of navigating loyalty and propriety. Maggie's eyes scanned the room, cataloging the positioning of guests, the slight hesitations in speech, the manner in which eyes flicked toward her before quickly shifting away, and each of these details was added to the ledger of her observations. She reflected on past occasions, recalling how subtle changes in seating arrangements, the timing of conversation, and the strategic placement of remarks had gradually shaped the environment to favor Romy's influence, and she noted the sophistication and consistency of these patterns. The faint aroma of roasted vegetables and freshly baked bread filled the air, grounding Maggie as she continued to observe without a word, allowing her presence to communicate quiet authority. She thought of the holidays and family gatherings she had meticulously planned, the attention to detail that had gone into every dish, every decoration, every arrangement, all aimed at creating harmony and warmth, and how those efforts contrasted with the calculated maneuvers she was witnessing now. Each observation reinforced her understanding, providing clarity about the ways in which influence and control had been exercised subtly but consistently. Maggie adjusted her posture slightly, tilting her head to catch a brief expression from Romy, a slight tightening of the jaw, a measured pause, each a small confirmation of the strategies at play. She noted Ethan's subtle reactions, the nervous flick of a hand, the tension in his shoulders, all suggesting a delicate balancing act between his own sense of propriety and the influence of his spouse. The chandeliers cast warm reflections across crystal and silver, highlighting details that others might overlook, the flicker of candlelight providing a rhythm that Maggie matched with her own measured movements, reinforcing her presence as steady, calm, and attentive. She sipped her water slowly, letting the cool liquid anchor her as she traced patterns of speech, pauses, and micro-expressions, recognizing the ways in which the scene had been subtly orchestrated over time. Her awareness extended beyond immediate interactions, encompassing the broader history and context of family dynamics, the patterns of behavior that had unfolded and repeated with careful precision, and the signals that had previously been too subtle to interpret fully. Maggie's thoughts were methodical, each reflection feeding into her understanding of control, influence, and perception within the family unit, allowing her to anticipate the interplay of reactions and the subtle shifts in energy. She remained a calm, central presence, her composure a quiet counterbalance to the orchestrated maneuvering around her, signaling with every measured gesture that she was aware, observant, and prepared to respond with deliberate thought. In the gentle rhythm of conversation, Maggie's presence conveyed strength, dignity, and understanding, a silent assurance that she would navigate the complexities of the evening with clarity and insight, collecting information, observing interactions, and preparing for the moments when careful, strategic action would be required. She absorbed the details, assessed the intentions, and maintained an unspoken command of the space, a patient authority that would guide the subsequent unfolding of family dynamics without haste, preserving her composure while the undercurrents of manipulation revealed themselves through subtle yet unmistakable signs. The evening had settled into a quiet rhythm, the soft clinking of dishes and the muted hum of conversation forming a backdrop for Maggie Wilson's careful observations. She noted how Romy shifted subtly in her chair, leaning slightly toward Ethan in a way that suggested coordination, while Ethan's glances toward his mother betrayed uncertainty and the struggle to balance loyalty with conscience. Maggie's mind traced the patterns of the evening, identifying the small acts of influence and subtle manipulations that had been employed, not as isolated incidents, but as part of a deliberate orchestration over time. She recalled past dinners and gatherings, the incremental adjustments and strategic behaviors that had previously seemed insignificant, now revealing themselves as deliberate strategies aimed at consolidating control and shaping perceptions. The warmth of the chandelier lights, the gleam of polished silverware, and the reflections across crystal glasses highlighted the deliberate staging of the scene, each detail a component in the larger tableau of social dynamics. Maggie observed the reactions of other guests, the brief exchanges of glances, the small shifts in posture, the careful modulation of tone, and cataloged each moment with the precision of long practice. She reflected on her own history, the decades of meticulous preparation and consideration for family traditions, and recognized how her patience and measured approach had cultivated the ability to perceive and interpret subtle cues. As she sipped her water, she considered the broader context, the accumulation of interactions, the interplay of influence and perception, and the unspoken rules that govern behavior at this gathering. Each observation reinforced her understanding and informed a strategy grounded in patience, awareness, and deliberate action. Maggie's presence remained composed, a steady center in the midst of orchestrated behavior, her calm gaze and poised movements signaling quiet authority and confidence. She allowed herself to assess the room with a wide-angle perception, integrating immediate behaviors with historical patterns, constructing a clear understanding of motivations, intentions, and potential outcomes. The conversations continued around her, yet she maintained an acute awareness of tone, pacing, and emphasis, discerning the subtleties that suggested manipulation, discomfort, or concealment. She considered the implications of these observations for future actions, noting where interventions might be effective and where restraint would yield the greatest advantage. Maggie's attention to detail extended to every micro-expression, every hesitation, every subtle adjustment of posture, all contributing to a comprehensive mental map of the social environment. She remained patient, allowing events to unfold while maintaining control over her own presence and demeanor, knowing that influence and clarity could be exercised through observation and measured responses rather than immediate confrontation. Each moment reinforced the quiet power she held, the ability to interpret, anticipate, and act with precision while maintaining dignity and composure. Maggie internalized the lessons of the evening, recognizing that subtlety, patience, and awareness were her most effective tools in navigating the complex dynamics of her family, and that by remaining calm and observant, she could ensure that truth, fairness, and her own authority would ultimately guide the unfolding narrative with clarity and impact. As the final moments of the dinner unfolded, Maggie Wilson remained poised, her calm presence a silent anchor amid the subtle currents of conversation and observation. She noted the way Romy shifted her gaze, scanning the room for support, while Ethan's expression carried a blend of discomfort and cautious awareness. Every gesture, every measured pause in speech, and every subtle tilt of the head spoke volumes, and Maggie cataloged these with deliberate attention, understanding the unspoken dialogue that underpinned the evening. She reflected on the patterns she had observed throughout the night, recognizing the carefully orchestrated behaviors intended to assert influence and control, and she allowed herself a moment of quiet acknowledgement of the sophistication behind them. Her mind traced the history of such gatherings, recalling countless dinners, holidays, and family celebrations where patience, observation, and subtle influence had shaped outcomes without overt confrontation. Maggie considered the nuanced positioning of guests, the brief, almost imperceptible exchanges of glances, and the modulation of tones that suggested strategic communication, all woven into a complex social tapestry that she now perceived with clarity. She sipped her water with measured precision, the cool liquid grounding her as she continued to observe, her awareness extending to the smallest details, the angle of a hand, the lift of an eyebrow, the brief hesitation in a response, each a piece of the larger puzzle she was assembling. The chandelier light cast gentle reflections across the polished surfaces, highlighting the meticulous arrangements she had made over the years and contrasting with the orchestrated tensions Romy attempted to introduce. Maggie's reflections on past experiences reinforced her understanding that influence could be exercised with subtlety, patience, and strategic observation rather than direct assertion. She noted Ethan's careful attempts to maintain neutrality, the slight tension in his shoulders, and the fleeting moments of eye contact that revealed his internal negotiation between loyalty to his spouse and residual respect for his mother. Maggie's perception extended to the rhythm of the room, the ebb and flow of conversation, and the silent signals exchanged among guests, providing her with a comprehensive understanding of interpersonal dynamics. Every detail, from the placement of silverware to the positioning of chairs and the cadence of dialogue, contributed to a map of intention and influence that Maggie could navigate thoughtfully. She maintained a steady composure, her body language calm and deliberate, a subtle but undeniable statement of authority and awareness. As the evening drew to a close, Maggie absorbed the remaining interactions, noting the subtleties in tone and the shifts in posture that indicated acknowledgement of her presence and insight. She allowed herself to integrate the lessons of the evening, understanding that the quiet exercise of awareness and patience could yield power as effectively as any overt response. With each measured breath, she reinforced her inner clarity, prepared to act strategically when the time was right, and confident that her composed observation had provided her with the insight necessary to navigate the complexities of family relationships with dignity, influence, and thoughtful precision. In the final moments, Maggie's presence remained steady and unwavering, a testament to her accumulated experience, awareness, and the quiet, deliberate power of patience and perception guiding her through the intricate dynamics of the family gathering. Experience a gripping family story where the matriarch, the mother-in-law, navigates subtle manipulations and hidden tensions at a family dinner. Maggie Wilson carefully observes the calculated behaviors of her daughter-in-law, Romy Carter, and her son, Ethan, while reflecting on years of unnoticed contributions and the quiet authority she has developed. This episode highlights the intricacies of family stories, showing how patience, awareness, and subtle observation can reveal hidden motives and influence interactions without confrontation. Through careful cataloging of gestures, expressions, and social cues, Maggie demonstrates the power of presence and composure, providing a compelling narrative for anyone interested in real-life family stories. This video delivers a thoughtful exploration of complex dynamics, resilience, and insight, reinforcing why family stories remain a powerful lens through which we understand relationships, influence, and legacy within households. Follow along as the layers of strategy, observation, and quiet authority unfold, offering viewers both intrigue and lessons in navigating nuanced family stories. The interplay of Maggie's reflections, Romy's calculated actions, and Ethan's conflicted responses creates an engaging tableau that embodies the depth and subtlety found in many family stories. Character 1 Maggie Wilson is a white elderly woman around 65 years old wearing an elegant long-sleeve blouse and tailored skirt standing in a living room looking directly at the camera with composed posture and calm expression. No cartoon, no CGI, no illustration. Character 2 Romy Carter, is a white woman in her mid-30s wearing a fitted blazer and smart trousers standing in a dining room looking directly at the camera with confident expression and slight smile. No cartoon, no CGI. No illustration. Scene 1. Maggie Wilson and Romy Carter stand across from each other at the center of an elegantly set dining room with a long polished oak table between them, tension palpable in the air, both staring with measured intensity as family members watch silently, the chandelier light casting sharp reflections highlighting the seriousness of their confrontation, each gesture deliberate, each glance a challenge, full of quiet authority and subtle threat. Scene 2. Maggie Wilson in her sunlit kitchen preparing a meal with careful precision, arranging vegetables and folding napkins, her expression focused and calm, the aroma of roasted chicken filling the room, sunlight glinting off the polished silverware as she moves gracefully from counter to stove, demonstrating her meticulous attention to detail and poise in everyday domestic life. Scene 3. Romy Carter in a sleek home office reviewing documents and arranging place cards on a desk, her posture confident and composed, sunlight filtering through blinds casting lines across her blazer, the room tidy and organized, emphasizing her calculated demeanor and the controlled environment she maintains as she plans and organizes with intent and precision. Scene 4. Both Maggie Wilson and Romy Carter seated across a conference table from a neutral family friend acting as mediator, tension high, the body language rigid, Romy's confident stance contrasted with Maggie's calm authority, documents and notes spread across the table highlighting the high-stakes negotiation and the intricate power play between them, each observing the other carefully, calculating responses. Scene 5. Maggie Wilson in the quiet of her living room reflecting on the events of the day, sunlight streaming through sheer curtains, her hands folded calmly in her lap, gaze focused and thoughtful, the polished furniture and carefully arranged decorations underscoring the deliberate and controlled atmosphere she maintains while contemplating the next steps and asserting internal resolve. Scene 6. The dining room again, now empty except for Maggie Wilson standing near the sideboard, her posture composed and serene, the remnants of the dinner on the table, soft candlelight reflecting off crystal and silver. She gazes across the room, a faint, knowing smile appearing as she absorbs the quiet aftermath of confrontation, the room filled with subtle triumph and restored dignity, a calm into the evening full of insight and reflection.